Now I want to turn to Steve Sherrill. Steve has a real surprise for
Oh,
us. He's going to involve another modeler in it, but he tells me that this is really going to knock our socks off. He says this is his premiere What Do You Want to Talk About show. No one else has ever thought about doing anything as nice as Steve is going to show us now. This is going to be magnificent. It's one of the most beautiful What Do You Want to Talk About section I've ever heard of. Hi, Steve. It's your turn.
okay, I'm ready. Well, tonight we are going to talk about having an open house. Now, many of us have had our layouts open more than once. Some of us have had them open many, many times. But we don't always remember that first time that we said, I'll open my house, and raise your hand, when they said, who wants to have the layout open? Well, tonight I have Greg Cassidy, who just had an open house this past weekend. Now, we know Greg, he's done a lot of things on new tracks, but I must say that I've been in his shoes having a first layout and also having a first operating section on a layout. So I'm going to ask Greg to come on now, and we're going to talk to Greg about what he went through to get ready for this open house. And of course, my first question would be, why now? You've had a layout that was finished, or you thought was finished, for many years. Why did you pick this weekend to say, I will have an open house? Greg, are you there?
Well, thanks, Steve. I suppose, like so many other things that I get involved in and then have second thoughts about afterwards, it was because I was asked to. And I have trouble saying no sometimes, most of the time.
Now, this was for the NMRA division, am I correct?
You're right. I'm a member of the Potomac Division of the Mideast region of the NMRA. The Potomac Division encompasses Central Maryland and Northern Virginia. And the Mideast region is all the way from Northern Pennsylvania down to North Carolina.
Okay. Now, you actually, your open house was in conjunction with a division meeting, am I correct?
That's right. They try to space their meetings, some in Virginia and some in Maryland, the Potomac being a rather large dividing line. And they were having a meeting here in Maryland last weekend, and it wasn't very far from my house. And they were looking for some layouts. I had never had mine on a layout tour before. And they said, why don't you give it a try? And I said, well, you don't know what that would lead to, but okay, I'll do it. And I had mine, and we had 3 other layouts on the tour. And this was after a morning meeting that the division was having.
Now, your layout had been, how far along was your layout, would you say?
Well,
8%? I mean,
my layout, I started it in 1994. And while I know a layout is never finished, mine was essentially finished in 1996. I ran trains. I kept adding a little bit of details, buildings here and there. And I had plans for a much bigger layout that never got built. But my layout was done to the extent that I still had some other things I wanted to do that I was going to get to someday. And that someday just kept getting pushed further and further into the future.
So you were actually almost 30 years from the time you started until you had your first open house.
Exactly.
Well,
and a good portion of that time, uh, it sat dormant, and I'm ashamed to say that it wasn't really very much cared for because, as most people here know, my enjoyment it comes out of building structures for myself and for other people. And so when I go downstairs, if I go to the left, I have the layout. If I go to the right, I go to the workshop, which is my real happy place. So the layout just, it got neglected.
Do you have a picture of your downstairs, maybe to show where your layout is? And
I do. And if you're ready, I will go ahead and take you through a few pictures showing what getting ready for this open house was like.
now, when you volunteered to have your house open, how long a time did you have from the time you said yes until the time they walked in the door?
Well, I had about 6 weeks, which at the beginning sounded like plenty of time. And then as I got deeper and deeper into getting ready, all of a sudden that time got real short. So here, let me show you this is what my layout looked like. And I'll say probably it looked like this for the past 20 years. I had pretty much finished doing stuff to it. It's not a big layout. It's about 12 by 16, kind of a large L shape. It's HO and it runs on Digitrax. But when I say runs on Digitrax, I hadn't really run things for quite a few years. And with the exception of the few of you that are in dead rail, you know that that means the track is going to get dusty. It's going to get oxidized. And of course, the spiders are going to have a field day, you know, building webs everywhere they want to. So this was my starting point. And I had about 6 weeks to get it running. And I will say at this point, I turned it on and I got the locomotive to move about an inch before it stalled out because of dirty track. Now, this portion, which is the whole front of the layout, is kind of this brown-green color. And that's the part that I had someday planned to finish because in my mind, it was never finished. I wanted to put foliage on it. You know, back when I was building it, ground foam was the foliage that you tended to use. And I just couldn't bring myself to covering the whole thing with ground foam. And these trees are just stuck in holes because I knew I'd be removing them someday to finish it. So that's why they're leaning, and every now and then one would fall over. So,
Greg, did you make all the trees?
no, I made some of them, especially some of the trees in the background. These trees in the foreground, if I saw a few that I liked at Timonium, I'd go ahead and pick them up. And knowing that sooner or later I'd get around to doing them proud.
Now, your layout construction would real basic,
Yeah, it's a basic L girder, bench work, and most of it is the cardboard web strips covered with hydrocal shell or a plaster shell. And just standard layout construction techniques that are used back in the 90s.
And it was a continuous type of run. I mean, it wasn't really built.
Yeah, it basically is 2 figure eights that in part of it form double track main, and a part of it crosses over the other part with a reversing loop and a yard and some crossovers and stuff like that.
Now, the reason I'm saying this is anybody who's hesitant to have their house open because they don't think your layout is interesting, it doesn't have 100 switches, or it's not set up for operation, you're making a big mistake.
Yeah, this is a very basic layout. The track plan that I started with came out of one of Lynn Westcott's books back from the 60s or 70s, I believe. And I did a slight modification, then added on some to it when I was building it. But it's a very simple layout. It doesn't lend itself really to operations except for 1 or 2 people at the most. But when I expressed all of those doubts to the people running my division, they said, it doesn't matter. People like to see layouts. Your layout is fairly close to the meeting, that they always like not having to drive too far. And I said, well, okay, I'll give it a try.
Now,
My first step was cleaning everything off of the layout so I could get it running. And that meant taking the cars off. And as I was removing them, I would clean the dust off of them with a brush or a can of compressed air. And I did the same thing with the locomotives. And I stored everything away, including taking off all of those trees. And then I had pretty much a bare palette that I could work with. I removed the couple of buildings that are in the front there so that I could get to all of the track and clean it. Now, one of the nice things about having to do something like this, I came across things that kind of needed fixing or upgrading. As I was taking some of the cars off, I could tell that they weren't maybe up to weight, and I didn't notice it when I had put it on 20 years ago. So I was able to fix some of that. I was able to add some details that I had always wanted to some of my scenes. I made the little wood pile and I picked up the truck. And this is my pulpwood scene that I had never really completed. And I also was able to add the telephone poles that had been sitting in a drawer on my workbench for probably over 10 years. I put them together, I painted them, and I finally put them in place running down the road that I had meant to do, honestly, a couple decades ago.
so you actually renewed some interest in.
Oh, absolutely. And that was the fun part is, I needed this kick in the pants to actually get around to doing some of the stuff that I'd always wanted to do. But then came the hard part, which was cleaning it. There were a couple of areas that had pop-outs that I used to be able to fit in 30 years ago when I built it that I don't fit in anymore. So I had to use a long pole with a brush to get some dust off and clean a few things off. And then came the onerous task of cleaning the track. And I got out a couple of chemicals that people in our model railroad club swear by. We have one camp that says CRC 226 is the best thing in the world for cleaning track. And we have another camp that says, no, you need to use mineral spirits. They'll really clean the track. So I ran my track cleaning car around. And since I basically have two loops, I used the CRC on one of them and the mineral spirits on the other to try and get my own idea of which one worked better. And when I was done with that, this is how the track came up using the CRC. And this is how the track was after using the mineral spirits. So there was no conclusive evidence that one was better than the other. And I'm sure there's probably lots of clinics and lots of opinions about the best way to clean tracks. All I know is that I got all of my trains running, and that was really what mattered the most. I also went in and cleaned all of the wheels on my locomotive because I know that they had been running on dirty track or trying to run, and they'd been sitting for a long time. Stuff can oxidize. So I cleaned off as many of the wheels as I could as well. Now came the part that I had wanted to finish and never got around to, and that was doing the scenery on the front part of the layout. And this is where I got some help from Bob Geldmacher. As some of you may know, he had worked with Scenic Express, and he knows a lot about putting down scenery. And I had told him I had been using Martin Welberg products, and he said, also take a look at the Heike microfloor. It makes a good base to put down underneath the Martin Welberg products. So this was some of the Heike microfloor that I put down as a base, and I put the trees back in place so that I would know where they're going to go as I was putting the stuff down. I just used white glue to glue this down, and it was going to be the base underneath the Martin Welberg product. And so I had been collecting these over the years, and I used some of them on dioramas that I built, and I can't speak enough about how much I like his products. But this was going to finally use a lot of the materials that I had been collecting over the years. And it goes a lot slower because you're putting down very minute pieces at a time if you want to get the type of variety that you're going after. And I put a chair there, and I'd come down and work for a few hours and then do something else, come back, do a few hours more. And I did that day after day after day. And I knew I wasn't going to get all of the layout done in time for the open house, but I did want to have some of it done so people could see my impression for how I wanted to finish it. And this is how it ended up coming out in that one section that I'm doing. And like I say, the Martin Welberg products are second to none in terms of their realism if you apply them properly and you use the variety that you see in nature. And so this is how that scene came out. And it was good enough for me that, and I'd finished this about 2 days before the open house was supposed to come. And I said, well, I made it. People will now see my vision for how I plan to finish off the rest of the layout. And I was actually looking forward to getting some of their opinions about, you know, some of the other areas. Should I have it more wooded? Should I have it more open and stuff like that? And not having it finished gives you the opportunity to have some of the visitors to your layout express their opinions if you ask them. And I had cleaned up the rest of the basement as well, which again, that needed a lot of work also. I had put up our club's banner that we use for our scholarship program, and I even had our club's little N scale layout over here in the corner with it running as well. So we actually had 2 trains running during the open house.
Greg, before
yes.
you go back to that slide for a minute, please. You see those doors? Greg was kind enough to notify the organizers of the open house meet that weekend that he was handicap accessible because they could go around the back of the house and have no steps to go in. So if somebody came with a wheelchair, they could probably get in. If they had some other difficulties, they didn't have any steps to maneuver over.
Yeah,
so,
it doesn't even have to be a wheelchair. I have one friend who he uses one cane, but he does have trouble with stairs. And
right.
You know, being able to access it on a ground level like this, even though they have to come down a little bit of a hill from the front to the back of the house, would have made all the difference.
So if you're considering having an open house and you have access, make sure you tell the organizers, yes, I'm handicap accessible at my house. Also, I like the way you got your buildings displayed. You've got your some of your cars.
Yeah, and you also want to make sure that you have seating because, you know, some of us have trouble standing for a long time. Now, you know, I was enjoying it, so I didn't mind standing, but the seats were very much appreciated by some people, especially if they were on their second or third layout during the tour.
Now, I see that you actually cleaned up underneath the railroad.
Yeah.
Really, I noticed that. And what people see and the image that you portray is very important when you're having an open house. If you can put the stuff, you know, someplace else and have it look really neat, it goes a long way. Presentation. If you notice on the table down here, I believe that's a sign-in book. Am I correct?
Yep.
A sign-in book on your visitors.
So, and I also put together a little sheet explaining my layout, you know, what my idea for it was, you know, the era and the location, and how I had built it, when I had built it. And those were just handouts that people were welcome to take if they were interested in it.
Yeah, you're modeling the Western Maryland. So you have an actual prototype railroad you're modeling. All your locomotives and diesels are painted Western Maryland, and a lot of your cars. So you actually have a setting, you know, you have a location. Yep. So that goes a long way for the story of your railroad, why you have it like it is.
Well, and one thing that I really appreciated, 2 of the guests that came by were friends who worked together. They were both Amtrak engineers, although one of them had retired. And he was looking at my locomotives, and he made a very nice compliment that I had actually gotten the proper Leslie 5-chime horns put on the Western Maryland locomotives that I had, that Western Maryland used, but that weren't that common, and that he appreciated the extra effort of getting the correct type of horns on it. And that made me feel good that somebody who would know so much about them actually noticed that.
No, the small detail too.
Yeah. And then the day of the open house came, I went to the meeting, and they had 2 very nice clinics there, which I really enjoyed. Plus, all the business meeting that the division goes through. And then I came back home, and I had a couple of signs. They gave me some layout tour signs to put in front. I had one on each side of the mailbox. And then I also had the one that I had made, because I didn't know it. They were going to give me signs. So I put that up by the door. And I only managed to take one picture during the whole open house. And that was when people first started showing up. The rest of the afternoon, and the open house went on for 4 hours. I was busy with trains running the whole time and answering questions and meeting with people. We'd go into the workshop, and they'd ask me questions about how I did this, or what was that tool used for, what kind of paints did I like, stuff like that. But I have to say, and I think this has already been alluded to, my layout was not the hit of the open house. One of the reasons that I agreed to do the open house was I went to my wife when they first approached me and said, honey, how do you feel about having an open house? They want to put me on the layout tour. And she goes, you mean I can make snacks and food for people? Yes. And I said, okay. So this is my lovely wife. She collects railroad cookbooks. You see a number of them there. Some of them are books that just have recipes that the railroads used. And a couple of the ones she has are actual books that the railroad used for its dining staff and cook staff, showing them how to cook and how to serve ingredients. So she picked 4 snacks out of those books that she wanted to make. And I made a placard for each one of those. And you can see them here. So out of the B&O, she made an assorted cold cut with deviled eggs. The Milwaukee Road had a type of fudge that they offered. The Western Pacific had celery that was filled with a mixture of peanut butter and something else. And then the Missouri Pacific lines had deviled eggs. No, the deviled eggs were Western Pacific. Missouri Pacific had the celery. But she put all of these together, plus she made lemonade, because that's what they tended to serve on the railroads back in the 40s and 50s and 60s. And people left the house talking about all the snacks and all the food, and how good it was to see something that was made the way it was made on a dining car back in the 40s and 50s. And so that was the hit of the show.
That was fantastic. To me, that's just a knockout. I mean, to get her she volunteered to do it. That was even more. But that was just
Well, and the newsletter editor for our division, he said, Greg, I'm putting in the article, the photos of all the different layouts, because he had come around the day before the open house to take pictures of the layouts so they could all be represented in the newsletter. He said, Greg, send me a picture of those snacks, because that's going in the newsletter as well. So.
I think that was so unusual. I had never heard of that. Anybody doing that. And that was just, as someone who actually got married on a train, that was very unusual. Very unusual.
Well, she's an unusual woman. She's a great cook. And she really has some great ideas sometimes, and this was one of them. And it just happened to fall into her wheelhouse where she had been collecting these recipes and these books for a long time. So it
Hey,
worked out well.
and she wanted to show off that new kitchen too. Now,
Well,
come
that
on.
was part of it. That was part of it.
But the thing is, you really can't be afraid to have if you have a layout, share it. And I think there's nothing like having people over talking about your layout. They can give you hints. Not everybody's going to like your layout. Some of them are going to like something. They're not like everything. I mean, that's just the way it is.
Yeah.
But it's your layout, and you can be as proud of it as you want to be. I would only offer one suggestion to you, Greg. Next time you have an open house, you have somebody else there to help you to run the trains while you were, kind of herding the people up to eat those snacks.
Uh-huh.
I think, if a person's been there to run the train could have maybe done, changed out some locomotives.
Well, I did have one of the guys from the club came over and he hung around the afternoon.
Yeah.
So that helped me out. And he was able to explain to people, if I was busy with one group of people, he could explain a little bit about it. He was familiar with it. He was familiar with our club's N scale layout. So it did help to have him there.
So you ended up with how many people coming over?
About 27.
Now that's a pretty good turnout.
It is. We're a small division, and we're a big division that has a small active group. So I was pleased with how many came by.
You're also spread on both sides of the Washington Beltway, which means you can't move half the time you're in traffic. You know? So
yeah, there were a number of people at the meeting who had come from Virginia, and as soon as the meeting was over, they hightailed it back to Virginia because the likelihood of getting caught in a traffic jam for a couple of hours is always there.
Yeah. Now, I would like to ask if anybody who is on the Zoom now, who's had an open house and had want to share their experiences. My open houses, I used to get 40 and 50 people coming in, and I just didn't have the room. I have narrow aisles, and it was a real problem. I know Greg was kind of lucky they were spread out for 4 hours. So you might have had 7 or 8 at one time. Am I right, Greg? I don't think everybody.
Yeah, there was a couple different waves. I think, some came to my layout first. Some went to one of the other two that was really close first. Yeah. And then came to my layout. So there was a couple different waves.
So does anybody else have anything they want to say about the layouts? I know that NMRA is a great way to see a lot of layouts. Other ways would be to go to a hobby shop. Sometimes they have certain times of the year when they have people who patronize them have their layouts open, and they have a weekend, and you get a schedule of where the layouts are and their locations for that weekend, and you pick it up at the hobby shop. So, once a year. And I know, like Blue Ridge Summit, I believe they're a sponsor here. They're going to have one in September, I think. I'll have to get the date on that. And there'll probably be 20 layouts on all around the area in Pennsylvania, Maryland, West Virginia even, and Virginia. So it's a good opportunity to see other people's layout, what they're doing, and learn things and share and meet other modelers. That's the important thing. It just see what's going on in the rest of the modeling world. There are people out there that just want to talk model railroads, and it's a great opportunity. So,
and I have to say, Steve, I have been on probably 12 different layout tours, each one stopping off at anywhere between 2 and 6 layouts. Between the division and mainline hobbies, every year has a layout tour where they can feature 20 to 25 different layouts.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in all those visits, I never thought about what it took to get ready for it. Now, some layouts, if they have operations every week, probably don't have to do much. Maybe just put out some snacks or set it up to run continuously instead of in operation mode. But for some others, it might take a little bit of cleaning up, a little bit of cobweb removal. But it was good in so many respects. It was great to clean the layout up, to get it running again, and just to share it with everybody else and have everybody come by.
Hey, Greg,
Yes.
it's Tom Farrell. I have a question.
Uh-huh.
Now that your layout is back in quote running condition, have you found yourself running trains again?
I have. But I will say that I know right now what I'm looking at and what I've started doing is going back and finishing the landscaping that for the rest of the layout that I had only started in the middle of it. And when I'm done with that, I'll have a big backlog of structures for other people that I need to get to. So will the layout be running continuously? I can't say.
What I found is when I work on my layout, I shouldn't say this new layout, but my old one, which had continuous running, this new one isn't ready for that yet. But I would run the trains round and round while I was working on the scenery or the structures, just for fun.
I can do that, and I hope to, because I know now that I have cleaned the track, I don't want to have to go through cleaning it from having sat for 10 years with nothing running.
Well, that's what I'm indicating is while it's running, run it.
Yep, exactly.
It's good for everything. You, the railroad, the engines, the cars.
And I will say, one of the things I found out, and I go back to, 25 years ago when I was having to clean the track, and, I'd hit it with a bright boy. And now, I think most people know that's probably not a good thing to do because it scratches the rail, and those little micro scratches can pick up dirt and problems like that. But just the amount of different philosophies on how to clean the track and different products to use, that could be a whole clinic or a series of clinics in itself.
And that probably would make a good clinic. One other question. Did you find when you did clean the track that the electrical system was intact and robust and you didn't have to go and troubleshoot anything? Did you
everything was good, except I have one crossover, and it's an old Walthers or Shinohara, circa 1994 crossover, that when the locomotive goes over it, my sound unit restarts. Now, I don't have keep alives in any of my locomotives. In fact, all of the decoders in them I put in back in the mid 90s. So they're that old. But everything worked fine except for that one crossing.
Well, that's a testament to the stability of your wiring. Yeah.
Yeah. I did enough stuff right now. I did have to have a refresher course in how to get my Digitrack system running again. And have a friend come over a couple months ago and say, okay, you push this, you push that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That darn thing has so many buttons on it.
Wow.
New ones are a little different.
Now, do you think you're going to change any scenes on it, on the railroad?
I don't know. To me, just, updating a couple of the scenes like I did makes it feel almost like a whole new layout. I've got telephone poles on it now. I do have plans to put a billboard on the back of it that I have sitting at the workbench. But I'm still at the point of just adding little details to it.
Yeah.
There won't be any major changes to it except for finishing the landscaping.
That's what catches everybody's eye, is the little details anyway.
Yeah. And I enjoy doing it. I've been doing it for the last 10, 12 years, building dioramas. It's just then you're working in a very small, maybe a 1x1 or a 1x2 space. Now I'm working in a 12x16 space. So I've got a lot
Yeah.
more details to add.
Now you know. Now you know why you bought 5 of those detail parts instead of just 1.
Yeah.
Well, does anybody else have any questions about open houses or any additions or suggestions or anything like that? Has anybody had an open house?
I've been to several open houses. Never had one personally, but
Now,
I've enjoyed every one I've gone to. So the Piedmont division of the NMRA here in Georgia has what they call the Piedmont Pilgrimage. So from starts August, September, and runs through Thanksgiving, and different members open up their houses on the weekends to do the different tours and layouts and stuff. And some of the stuff I've seen, it's just amazing what can be done. I did realize in the one tour that we did where the layout encompassed the entire basement, and they even had tunnels cut through the walls, including the bathroom downstairs, which they had a camera mounted to the trains. So I opted to use the restroom upstairs versus the one downstairs. But that was quite unique. But there's some amazing stuff out there, and I love going to see what other people can do. So I highly recommend. Even if you don't think it's good enough, I say do it anyway, because there's always something cool to see it at other people's places.
Now, from your standpoint as a non-model railroader, what really caught your eye? I mean, when you walked in, did you notice, hey, it's really clean area, or it wasn't, or they had a fantastic shop, or, I mean, it's huge. The railroad is huge, and I was overwhelmed. I mean,
yeah, some of them are huge and overwhelming. Some of them, just the techniques that were used to create objects that were on the layouts. Just looking at the detail and the scenery and everything that can be there. We even took my mother-in-law to a few, and she was just in awe between looking at the scenery and then watching the trains move, and it was just amazing. Matter of fact, she learned how to make trees and started making trees for us to sell, because the bush that this one person was using for the trees in their layout grew outside of her apartment. So that's how I got a lot of trees, was she decided to make trees for me from going to one of these pilgrimages. So it just looking at what people can do, scratch built, kit built, we went to one that had just a wall of brass engines that were all shiny brass colored. And he's like, yeah, that one was 75,000 for that engine. And I'm like, okay. And then you go to another one, it's like, yeah, that's my, American Flyer I had from when I was a kid, or, I scratch built this one, or it's just, each one has their own special, unique things. So it's hard to say, but just looking at the detail that goes into these, it's amazing.
we put in a lot of work getting ready for an open house, but it's really a thrill when we see people appreciating the work that we've done. I know that, I used to work really hard to get my layout ready. And you're always so fearful that 10 minutes before the opening date, the opening time, the thing won't run, because it's very important, I think, to have a layout with movement, to have those trains running. And it's just great to have an open house, I think.
From a non-model railroad, it's great to see the open houses. I enjoy them every year. So
yeah,
keep them up and open them up.
Yeah.
Sherry, can I say, we also have a gentleman in our club who has a pretty extensive model railroad in his basement, and he has part of his main line go through the bathroom as well. But he doesn't have a camera in there.
Okay, well, and they were doing live streaming, because the people that couldn't fit downstairs in the basement were upstairs snacks with the wife, and they were live streaming the train video up there on the large screen TV. So yeah, we didn't use the restroom downstairs.
Oh my God. Yeah. So anybody else have anything about open houses?
Steve, this is Jeff. I'd add for folks who want to get to an open house and they aren't a member of a club or something, of that sort of the NMRA, if you're in driving distance of Blue Ridge Summit, Pennsylvania, their event and their list of open houses is really impressive. You can go up and visit 4 or 5 layouts in one day.
Yeah. Yeah, we're going to do some down in my area. I think Steve Bittinger, myself, and another OM30 layout, which is pretty close by. We're going to have our layouts open. So I better get mine ready. Charge those batteries up. How about you? Have you had your layout open yet?
No, it's only been under construction for about 2 years on and off. And so I have not, I'm thinking that maybe the first thing I do is we have some sort of round robin in our club and visit each other's layouts.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, like I say, you don't have to have a big layout. It doesn't have to be finished. It's good if it has something that goes around in a circle or have movement, you know?
Well, that was the first thing I accomplished was to make sure it ran. And then now as you know, I'm a structure builder and I tend to overpopulate my layout with structures. I have to switch them out. And now I'm really intensively into filling in the scenery.
There you are. Well, my goodness. People like to see scenery going up. You know, it doesn't have to be finished.
Well, then come look at my scenery because it's not finished.
It won't take long once you get started. It goes pretty quick. Goes pretty quick. Well, I guess that's it, Jim. We're tired of sharing and eating those cookies.
I'm telling you, it's a lot of fun to have an open house. There's no question about
I'll take, and you know, Craig is so lucky to have his wife, you know, participate. Not only participate, but take a lead. And she was able to share something that she was interested in. And that was just fantastic. To me, that would have made the whole visit. I probably would end up talking to her and, you know, getting her story because you don't see that very often. You know, and it's important to have wives that will participate in these open houses. If as greeters, it's very important. I know as a model railroader, I always like to see the wives. I like to see the wives, even the children, the kids, you know, participate, come down and talk about grandpa's trains or dad's trains or whatever. It's just a good way to share. It's a great hobby. Great hobby. So that's it for me.
I agree. Thank you so much for doing this tonight, Steve and Greg. Fantastic. You ought to send a couple of photos, including one of all the food, to Martin, because that would be a great article. I think it really would be.
Okay, I'll get something to him. And Steve, thanks for mentioning this.
Oh, no problem. You know, I contacted Greg actually yesterday, and I asked him if he wanted to participate in this. I just thought it was a timely, subject to put out for people. And he said yes. And I wanted his wife to actually come on and talk about making the food and reading the books, but you can't get everybody to do everything, but it's really great that she did that. So I want to acknowledge her participation in that open house.
I think that was fantastic. No question about it. No question about it. It's funny, the last open house I had was right before we moved out of Michigan. And I think Fred Cosgrove was there. And it was for the Detroit United Trolley Club group. And we always had a good turnout, from different people coming to your house. So I imagine there was probably around 25 to 30 people. Mm-hmm. But the funny part about it is the wives would also come. And the wife of whoever was hosting it, she hosted mostly the wives, and the guys would go and run the railroad. But the wives would come and see. At least they wanted to come and see the railroad and see who else was involved with their husbands and so forth. And it was an interesting group. The group was interested in one thing, purely one thing. Where are the sweets and where are the Coca-Colas? And so you had, I mean, just bowl after bowl after bowl of M&Ms and nuts and so forth. And then you had the main course, which was normally chocolate cake. And it wasn't your normal chocolate cake because this group believed in eating.
Yeah.
And which meant that you went to the local baker. And you know those huge baking sheets that the bakers have, you know, when they're serving a huge group of people?
Yeah.
Well, that's what you'd buy. And you'd lug that thing home and cut it into pieces. And before the night was over, most of it was gone. But
Wow.
everybody was happy. They had their sugar high and plenty of Coca-Colas and root beer and so forth. But it was a great group of people, and it's unfortunate that club is disbanded now. But those kinds of organizations and being able to get together, that part of our hobby is. I hope we never lose that.
Well, you know, my wife has a cake pan shaped like a steam engine. So when you make cake, yeah. So that's kind of unusual too, but you know, so. But we just, you know, it can be so much fun. I mean, they're just sharing the hobby. Yeah, it's just great, you know.
Well, it is, and if Fred is still here, I don't know whether he's got a cell, but it's funny. I never got my railroad ready for anybody to come over. Most of the guys wanted to come over and get my railroad back running again. I mean, we spent a lot of time. People would repair this, do that. Fix this and so forth. I mean, it was worth hosting them just to get the railroad running again.
Wow.
But anyway, thanks so much, Greg and Steve. It was a great segment. I really do appreciate you all doing this.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Jim.